Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this webinar, where we will be exploring and examining the International RegTech Association's Principles for RegTech Firms, and we're very excited to be presenting these new set of open standards. My name is Richard Mayton. I look after strategic initiatives at the International RegTech Association, and today we'll be joined by Diana Paredes, Daniel Gosman and Jane Walsh as we model and present these standards. So if we move to our next slide, just to give you some context of the association and our purpose. Our goal as a not-for-profit global industry body and members association is to enable the acceleration of RegTech and its impact through collaboration, integration and knowledge sharing across the global ecosystem. So we operate as a not-for-profit in key marketing jurisdiction where we see RegTech adoption growing and accelerating, and we want to support, and we are supporting, the entire RegTech ecosystem in those markets, working with RegTech providers, regulated firms, regulators and advisors, and academics globally. And so if we move to our next slide, you see we have three main areas of focus and goals. So the first one is to create the global market awareness and education about RegTech, its impact and the difference it makes. And importantly, to enable the global collaboration and connection to advance the market development of RegTech. And also working closely with regulated entities and regulators to help support regulation, digitalization, and the goal of re-engineering systems. And so the principles for RegTech firms that we're publishing today and discussing this webinar fit firmly within our goal of enabling global collaboration and connections and advancing that market and development of RegTech. So to tell you more about those goals and the principles themselves, I'll hand you over to Diane Paredes.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Paredes. I'm the Vice Chair and Innovation, in the Innovation Working Group for IRTA. It's been really exciting. I'm also the CEO of Suede, and as part of the work that we've been doing as a company, but then also being able to realize that there was a huge opportunity for the RegTech organization to really contribute in bringing more standards together that can help more innovators to go into the scene. We've actually realized that there was a huge opportunity to help the industry overall by bringing the standards together. So the thing that's been happening for the working group, if you look at the next slide, you'll effectively see that the reason that we wanted to work on having a new set of open standards. There is a reality that we wanted to facilitate innovation and protect innovators as they would work in developing high caliber RegTech solutions. There is a reality that when you think about RegTech in many ways, it is about new enterprise software innovation. It's in many ways innovation about very traditional approaches of doing and integrating with financial institutions. And so what you wanted to really achieve with the standards was really to make sure that innovators entering the scene would be able to comply to a certain level of quality that would also allow them to continue innovating and tick the box from that perspective in order to actually be able to work with financial institutions, much larger than themselves or much more experienced than themselves. When it comes to IRTA, one of the things that we're very proud of is that we are an international organization. We are a non-for-profit, and we've been able to really bring together a lot of industry experts, and we've taken, of course, a lot of guidance from understanding what the regulators are trying to do overall. So there is a reality in terms of the spirit of the rule that needs to really be understood when it comes to RegTech. So it's not just about technology, but it is also very much around why and how to bring regulators to the table. In order to make sure that as we progress as innovators, we're also making sure that the experience of people that know maybe or that have been around the space for much longer can really be paired and married very well with the innovation that comes from a technology perspective. And so what we're going to be discussing today is the great work that has been done in terms of standards for RegTech in particular. And so what kind of standards can be adopted effectively for RegTech organizations to be able to thrive in the innovation space of financial services overall. But we are looking at a few different things as well. So there are obviously standards around RegTech integration and implementations, but then we are also looking at exploring what data standards and publishing standards can also be doing for our industry overall in terms of promoting innovation and also making sure that innovation does not have a negative impact into the ecosystem of the financial industry. So I'll hand over now to Danny and Jane, who will introduce themselves and give you a lot more detail about the great work they've been doing in terms of the RegTech standards.
Thanks, Diana. Hi, everybody. It's Jane Walsh here. I am a board member of the International RegTech Association. I'm also co-founder and CEO of a regulatory intelligence platform called Enforced. My background is as a regulatory lawyer and a former member of the enforcement division at the UK regulator. So that's me, and I've been delighted to work on these standards with Dr. Daniel Gosman, who can introduce himself now.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, my name's Daniel, or Danny Gosman. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sydney Business School and also an honorary fellow at Henley Business School in the UK. From a few years now, my area of research is focused around the intersection of emergent technology, things like cloud, blockchain, AI, policy, and financial services. So I've been very lucky and excited to be able to contribute to this standard.
Thanks. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so what Danny and I thought we'd do is, before we get on to the actual standards and our answer to the problems we've identified, is give a bit more detail on the background to the creation of these standards and why we thought that they might be beneficial and helpful. And obviously we've got very complementary perspectives from the work that we've done, and also from talking to our network. So we've just got some talking points here that we're going to discuss. And the first one we have is, what are the barriers for RegTech firms? So I'll just kick off with that before handing over to Danny for his view. It seems to me, as somebody that has an early stage RegTech firm, that one of the critical things you need to do when you're trying to provide convincing technology to help firms solve problems is to assure that firm, which is very heavily regulated because it's likely to be a financial services organization, to assure them that you have credibility, that you understand what it means to be regulated, that you understand the pressures that they face, and also critically the risks that you as a RegTech firm could pose to their operation if, for whatever reason, your tech falls over, something happens with your management team. I mean, hopefully these things would not happen, but as a RegTech firm, you have to be cognizant of what the incumbents are expecting, because, of course, you know, if we're innovative RegTech firms and we're expecting, for example, a big bank to engage with us, we've got to remember what it looks like from their perspective. You know, we're not IBM, we're not a massive organization that's got millions of pounds of power behind it should something go wrong. And I think that's very important, because if you want people to innovate, if you want them to try something new, you have to hold their hand. And I think for me, certainly part of the creation of these standards is to hold the hand of the industry, people that we want to be our clients, people who we want to work with to innovate, to say to them that yes, we might be smaller companies, we might, in some cases, quite big companies, we might be technologists by background, as well as regulatory people, but we do know what we're doing and we understand what we are asking of you when we are saying, let us handle your client onboarding, or let us deal with your regulatory reporting. We've got a fabulous solution that we actually really know what that means and what a big deal it is. So that's my 2 pence worth, Danny. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So I think it might be worth saying a little bit about how we collected the input for the standard at this point. And what we did was we sought feedback from a number of industry stakeholders through some of the research that I was doing in parallel with developing the standard, and also, as Jane said, through her own networks. And we looked for feedback from different stakeholders, including investors, some regulators, RegTechs, of course, and also the incumbent banks, to try and get a rich picture of some of the issues and challenges we're being faced. And what came out of that was some interesting quotations. And I guess what I'd like to do is just present two alternative perspectives about some of the challenges that RegTech firms face, or the barriers that RegTech firms face. So the first quote comes from an extremely experienced entrepreneur who's been very involved with the RegTech and FinTech scene globally, and has had much success in that place. And he suggested to us that most banks are all excited about meeting a startup and understand what they do. They're just great. We can do something. We can improve our process, but then they want to test the service. And once you test and onboard the application, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare because despite whatever the bank says, most of them are catastrophic in the way they manage onboarding. And I'm coming back to human nature. If people within the bank are just not used to change, and don't get me wrong, I'm not judging them because they are running their processes very well, but they're not used to open or sometimes open to change because the change can impact 1 million customers. So you cannot ask the people within the bank to have a mindset to embrace new innovations and change easily without rigorous testing. So often people generally find a way to slow down the onboarding process because they fear change. Well, that's obviously quite an extreme view of some of the barriers for RegTech firms. So and it puts a lot of perhaps some of the pressure on the banks. But an alternative perspective from a RegTech firm we talked to said, a lot of times people will say, oh, large organizations and banks, they don't know how to deal with RegTechs. But I think a lot of the blame is mutual. I think startups also don't know how to deal with large companies and the banks and their concerns either. The banks have a lot of requirements, but they have those for a reason. They have stringent security processes for a reason. They have infrastructure requirements for a reason. And so I think the fintech should understand, or at least know, where the enterprise is coming from. So I guess to summarize some of the things that came out of the discussions we had was that the barriers include things like navigating governance and bureaucracy processes within the large banks, sometimes slow decision making, naturally budget constraints, and also silo budget holders. So often within banks, the budgets for RegTechs or RegTech technologies are placed in different silos. There isn't often a joined up thinking or joined up procurement process across all areas. And then, of course, things like sensitive IT systems architectures, disparate data architectures and silos, and, of course, the ongoing hassle of privacy regulations.
Brilliant. So one of the things that's been interesting for us, as Suede, is that obviously we've seen that there is a lot of challenges for the financial institutions to really work with RegTechs. So we've experienced, there is a lot of complications, of course, with data. There's a lot of complications around legacy systems. Those were probably the two main things that people pointed out in our adventures would be the most complicated ones. But I would say that one of the things we've also realized is that more complicated than that is more legacy mentality and different ways of working. And so I think that sometimes with these RegTech standards, what can be interesting is that it becomes maybe more a tick-in-the-box exercise to make sure that we're complying with everything that they want, so that legacy mentalities can sit at rest, I guess, and feel comfortable that they can be interacting with the RegTechs. Would you say that that's something that's been similar in your experience and in your findings?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want people to, to see the standards as a kind of tick box, and absolutely they're meant to give an institution, at least some comfort that the RegTech itself has thought about the issues that might impact the institution when dealing with that organisation, because, on the big challenges that institutions face, it's innovating in a large organisation is always really difficult, and it's finding the right stakeholders is hard, finding some budget is hard, getting busy, stressed out people who've got a million things to do to even consider something new is difficult. So anything we can do to make that easier and to give them a reason to say, yes, I'll have a look, rather than a reason to say no, is a powerful thing. So, you know, specific challenges, as we touched on in answer to the first question, relate to, you know, the security of your tech, the skills of your management team, your corporate structure. And I think with these standards, if we can cover off some of those points, it should just make those internal conversations that the innovation people or the initial stakeholders who are dealing with us need to have much easier for them. So they can say, you know, yeah, this might be a small company you've never heard of, and we're going to look at them instead of some huge organization, but actually they're part of this wider industry group, they know what they're doing, they can assure us that they've thought about X, Y, Z. So it sort of truncates the process, the onboarding process, and even before you get to onboarding, it can help to actually open doors and get the discussion started, so to overcome the barriers. Danny, I don't know what you think in answer to that.
No, absolutely, and I think that, you know, some of the challenges that are faced between the two types of organisations involved are often cultural. So understanding the bank's culture compared to understanding the culture of the RegTech firms, and understanding the needs and requirements of each party, I think is very important. I think often the financial institutions don't understand fully the pressures that the RegTech firms are on, or vice versa. One of the things that we found from our research is that a lot of these guys are, a lot of the RegTech firms are quick to put a product together, a viable product together, and are often using agile methods. And sometimes that means that they haven't got perhaps all the background or history in terms of documentation and testing that a bank might expect. And I think one of the major challenges, therefore, for the banks is how do you engage with a RegTech or a startup in a way which allows them to come on board and doesn't hold up their process. So, and I think that's quite a cultural shift for many banks.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the point when we think about this legacy mentality. I think this is where a lot of this value can come in terms of making a bridge between people who maybe want to really work with technology, but need to make sure that internally they have things, effectively within the organization. And then also making sure that the RegTechs, like we say, come with the right level of preparation when it comes to engaging with the financial industry overall. One of the things that has also been quite interesting to understand, we were mentioning, for example, the likes of very large companies like an IBM or KPMGs, and so when it comes to working with new companies, right? So what do you think financial institutions are overall trying to get out of the RegTech firms? What are they really looking for when they want to work with us?
Jane here. I think my answer to that, which is coming from some quite direct experience I've been having recently, and it's a cause of a little bit of frustration, but what a lot of them are looking for is an end-to-end solution. And one of the issues in RegTech now is we're still quite an early industry, and it might be that some consolidation is required or will happen over the coming months and years, because financial institutions, they want everything from you. And some of them aren't particularly good at maybe saying, okay, we'll work with you on X, even though you haven't got A to Z, you've got X, Y, Z. They want A to Z, and that's a little bit frustrating. But I think the more that we can do as RegTechs to work together and cooperate and collaborate, the more we can address those issues. But I do think there's more of a learning point on the financial institution side to say, let's think more laterally about this. Can we use a platform? And again, going onto some sort of a platform as a RegTech that's adhering to these standards means that, the other platform participants know that you're a good, well-organized firm. I think that's a positive thing. But certainly, I suppose, my experience of what they're looking for mainly is they're looking for you sometimes to boil the ocean, it feels like, but perhaps on a slightly more optimistic note, they're looking for firms that are solving a problem that they have and can solve it quickly, easily, but in a low-risk way. They don't want to be exposed to lots of risk. So yeah, they want good solutions to solve problems. They don't want tech for tech's sake. Absolutely not. They want us to go in and do something better than they can do themselves, you know, with their legacy struggles, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely not having, you know, the solution to everything. It is maybe sometimes what's expected, but I think that there is a real argument about how RegTech can be a lot cheaper point solutions, as long as it's not a nice to have, but something that is a must have, which is usually the case with regulatory technology. Then, you know, it is part of the sales process, I guess, also for financial institutions to understand and realize that this concept of, you know, too big to fail, which has been proven to be completely wrong for financial institutions themselves, is probably as true for their legacy infrastructure and their legacy vendors that do promise an end-to-end approach to everything, but actually don't really deliver in the same way that a RegTech can actually do when it comes to a point solution and resolving a very clear problem effectively.
So I'd just like to echo, you know, both of your points. I think that what we found from the research was that there was certainly the institutions are expecting the RegTechs to have some kind of cultural fit and understanding of what they want. You know, the question is, do they get it? Do they understand our concern? Do they understand our priorities? Do they understand that we're working in a kind of highly regulated environment, which is ironic for RegTech firms given their focus, but do they understand that this perhaps is not the same as other startups and won't proceed in the same ways that other startups from Silicon Valley may have been. On the sort of technical side of things, we found that scalability was something that often wanted to be proved. So, okay, your system works with 10 or 15 or 100 users. Will it work with 3,000? Will it work with 1 million customers? ISO standards was also something that was mentioned. And one of the barriers actually to interacting was found that the banks often ask for, you know, where's your ISO standard certification? But some of the RegTechs we spoke to highlighted that it was very expensive for them at early stages to go through a consultative process to get the standard. While the cost of the standard itself is not significant, getting consultants to help them work through that process was. The other thing that we found was penetration testing. So getting the banks to be confident that the systems were secure to a proper degree was often a challenge. Penetration testing, of course, is out of date almost the day after it's done, but also the cost of getting that done by a third party that would then be able to attest to that was something we found. And we also found, of course, that problems with security, when we spoke to some of the investors, can also devalue the RegTech, is a good way to devalue the RegTech in the eyes of investors. So if they don't have, for example, documented application lifecycle management, or they're dealing with a very kind of loose environment, often called agile, but not really any kind of process, and they don't have security practices documented and built in from day one, that can often affect their attractiveness to investors as well. Okay.
Thank you for that, Danny. That's all very, very pertinent. I think that there is the reality that the cost to entry, the more certifications you need, the more difficult it becomes for the startup. So that's where the RegTech standards can also help a lot. I guess the last question was really around the latest RegTech trends, right? So do you think that support, so that this approach effectively with RegTech can really help easier and faster implementations? Because that's obviously the key here. I think that one thing that we do probably better than very large incumbents is actually, the go-to-market approach. We're much more flexible and agile in terms of deployments and implementations. And so obviously, as long as you tick the box on the things that need to be ticked internally, then you could really see this as a huge opportunity to do the right thing, but then also accelerate deployment and efficient implementation effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest trends I'm seeing starting to happen, I touched on in answer to the earlier question, is this move to platforms. So there is huge value in efficient and frictionless and cost-effective point solutions. But if the RegTech industry can crack the platform model, then we're on to an absolute winner for many reasons and for many institutions. So not only do they get their, a nice KYC solution, depending on how big they are, and something also that can help them with reporting and something that can help them with keeping up to date with reg change or whatever the solution is, they can all be linked together on a very, very secure platform. platform that enables the firm to pick and choose what it wants and not have to onboard everybody separately, which is really time consuming. And then we know that people have a strong herd instinct in financial services, and being able to use solutions in a joined up way where you know that your peers are also using and trusting those solutions gives people reassurance, actually. And I think as the industry does start to mature and we see more RegTech companies gaining prominence and doing well and being relied on and getting those use cases, then, you know, RegTech adoption will become more widespread, and we can look to, you know, increasing consolidation, collaborations, and the use of platforms. So there's not quite so many really small firms all vying for the attention of the same few individuals in a large organization.
Yeah, interoperability is definitely key. I'm just going to repeat that, sorry. Interoperability is definitely key between all the RegTech players. Danny, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we found a number of industry-wide trends which can support or enable or maybe even hinder RegTech implementations. And it's very tempting to just sort of talk about cybersecurity, blockchain, AI, etc., without any, you know, not at a substantial level. But one of the things, obviously, is cybersecurity, which provides an existential threat to any kind of technology that is being onboarded with a bank. To return to a concept that Jane introduced, consolidation, I think is a major trend. I question how many AML solutions the market can bear. We also have some concerns over market infrastructure. So the idea that, well, from some of our research, showed that there were concerns around banks of people creating kind of platforms or systems or the next type of SWIFT that would create some kind of market infrastructure monopoly, and therefore the perhaps resistance to that. Speed of technology in the future. So we're doing some great work in the University of Sydney on increasing the throughput of blockchain significantly, and also quantum computing coming along. The expensive budget for human beings that's currently within compliance departments, that they've invested a lot in humans and they still can't employ enough of them, I think is a great driver for RegTech over years as the human, using humans for some kind of resources and some kinds of activities is clearly a quick fix, and I think that will change as RegTech matures. The government attention on ethical issues arising from new technologies, for example, artificial intelligence, work done by the House of Lords in the UK and the EU in this area, I think is a great opportunity for RegTech beyond financial services. Also, there is growing support from regulators, as I'm sure you guys know. However, one of the conversations we've had is it's worth mentioning that they're not willing, or so far not willing, to lower their standards to ease the onboarding process and some of the issues that we mentioned earlier. Growing collaboration across the regulators is, I think, also exciting. Other technological developments, so-called coders law, and efforts to codify and use smart contracts, I think, are also a great opportunity. And also a general drive towards customer centricity in the banks that we're seeing through initiatives like the open banking. And finally, I guess financial inclusion in the developing world, I think, will provide new and interesting markets for RegTech over time.
That's
true on the developing world point, Danny, because of course we've got RegTech for regulators run out of New York, that accelerator, which is very interesting, is doing some interesting work in less mature regulatory environments. And of course the opportunity there is there isn't lots of legacy tech that the regulators have, so they can sort of leapfrog a stage as they have with mobile in some developing nations. So that's very interesting. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's super. Thank you so much, guys, for going into some of these questions and deep diving about the reason, I guess, that we need these open standards. So what we would love to do now is basically go over your findings and the standards that you've put forward. So I'll hand over to you guys to basically explain the pillars, I guess, of what you've identified to be very relevant standards for the RegTech industry.
Sure. So I guess it might be worth starting by remembering the old joke about standards, which is the nice thing about standards is that there's so many to choose from, of course, which might beg the question, why in financial services are we introducing yet another standard? And I hope the discussion that we've had previously and the research that we mentioned and the views from Diana and Jane highlight the need to find some kind of high-level principles which can bring people together and at least be a point of departure for discussion and coming together. And so naturally part of that, and a major element of our standard then, is focusing on governance and control. So understanding things like the legal status of the firm, the suitability of management and appropriateness of the resources, and also looking at cybersecurity and the stability of the technology. And as I hinted at in the previous conversations, that's a major issue for firms, and that's something they need to be very clear that they can prove that they are stable, robust, that they can scale, and that they are secure. As far as the outsourcing arrangements go, that's something very important for organizations to consider, because some of the RegTech firms may well come under those regulations. And of course, the thing to highlight there is that firms, the banks, cannot outsource their regulatory responsibilities. They remain responsible for the regulatory process. Jane, would you like to comment on those?
Yeah, I would. So anybody looking at these standards will hopefully be able to recognise my background at the FCA, because I took as inspiration the threshold conditions, because that's a good enough place to start. And clearly, you know, as Danny says, that the competence and capability of management, particularly in these days of individual accountability, which is what the banks are all thinking about and all talking about, and of course the buy side as well, with the regime being rolled out to them, and we're seeing this regime in Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Yates memo in the US, as well as Ireland and the United Kingdom. So it's only right that a RegTech firm trying to engage with these firms says, yes, we take responsibilities and duties of senior managers and management within our firm seriously too. So I think that sends a strong message. So culturally, we know what we're doing. We run tight ships in our RegTech firms. The second point on outsourcing, I mean, I believe that's even more critical now, that we show we understand and appreciate that, because of course Brexit, I mean, I hate mentioning the B word, but there are so many restructures, sometimes light touch, sometimes more deeper, that are going on, which are meaning that companies themselves are having to outsource or near source bits of their operation to other offices, you know, and they might want to be engaging with RegTechs in that. So again, we need to show that we know what the duties and obligations are on an outsourced service provider, and we understand that the incumbents need to look at us carefully, and they expect us to have certain things in place, certain insurance in place, all of that stuff. And again, it just adds to the credibility of the RegTech firms to show that we understand and echo the duties and the obligations that those with whom we seek to do business have to comply with. So again, it's powerful messages. But again, Danny, I think it's important to note that you and I, you know, and getting the advice and the support of people like Diana and the rest of the IRTA in drafting these standards, have really tried to make them sensible and standards that you can comply with, and, you know, common sense. So I hope that as well people can see that, so that they are, you know, they are accessible and they make sense.
Absolutely. So one of the things that regulators often look for when evaluating outsourcing relationships is whether or not there's a firm outsourcing strategy, and whether the bank can articulate an outsourcing strategy, and therefore how the RegTech fits into that. And a key element of that is risk management and understanding the risks of engaging with a certain industry provider, which requires them not simply to sort of throw the issue overboard and expect the RegTech to proceed without monitoring. And that in turn requires, of course, the financial organisation to maintain the necessary skills and expertise. So understanding outsourcing risk and the resultant operational and technical risks that come with that is something very important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, good, well thought through risk management, particularly in a firm that might be early stage, is really, really important as well. And cash flow and all those business sorts of things, because, you know, an incumbent organisation that's looking to sign a contract with you needs to know that you're going to be around in a year. And a key part of ensuring that you are going to be around in a year or two, probably ironically, is the contract you're about to sign, but also really good, careful risk management and risk mitigation within your organisation. And then the last standard that we had, which we thought we'd put in, which is slightly different from the others, but it's to the sort of conduct, culture, industry point, is around collaboration, and just saying that, you know, RegTechs that sign up to this standard recognise that we're stronger together than we are apart. We've all got different bits of good technology. We can help each other. We can share best practice, ideas, innovation, which is all about what the IRTA is seeking to do anyway. So we thought it would send, again, a really positive message to have that in there, because we're not just looking to collaborate with each other, but to collaborate with the industry, with our clients, with our stakeholders, with regulators. I know, for example, Diana's done a lot of work with Suede, with the FCA, who have tech sprints, and other regulators are doing a lot of work too, and the IRTA and IRTA member firms that want to sign up to these standards are fully behind that and on board with it. So we all work together to help each other to really gain the greatest benefit from ever developing technology that we can.
And I think, to echo your point, Jane, that there is a reality when some of the best innovation happens from the Silicon Valley or anywhere around the world. It is a reality that actually there are a lot of companies, and good companies, that are collaborating together and really exchanging ideas. This is this cross-pollination of experience and expertise that actually makes a real strength in the value proposition. Collaboration in innovation is also very much by design, right? So there is a reality of building, software that is interoperable, that is open, that is easy to connect to, which is definitely something that we can represent as a RegTech industry. That is not necessarily the same principles that some of the incumbents will follow, but that for us has become very important. Effectively, this interoperability. By design that we're proposing as well, which is very much in line with things, with philosophies around open banking and all the other things that the regulators are also trying to get software companies to abide to.
And that brings us nicely to our next slide, where we're asking for help from the RegTech community. So as a point of departure, it might be worth mentioning that our position is that all feedback is good, positive and negative around the feedback, around the standard, some of the assumptions that we've talked about, some of the ideas that we've articulated, and the high-level standards. We would love your feedback from various different stakeholders within the industry, from the RegTech firms, obviously, from regulators, from legal firms, from investors, from policymakers, from tech firms. Have I forgotten anyone, Jane?
No, I think that's everyone.
Okay, so we'd like to ask for feedback via a survey link, which will be shared later on, the deadline being the 14th of January. After that, we will review the documents and make changes, and then hopefully launch the standard.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so just to echo Danny's points there about feedback, if we can crowdsource these standards to make them really, really good, then we're going to get much better take-up, and they'll be adopted by more people who've really brought into them in a meaningful way. So please do give us your feedback. We're not sensitive, so pull them apart if you think they're absolutely awful. Hopefully you don't. But please, if you think we've missed something, if you think there should be something else included or a different emphasis, please do let us know. Good feedback, critical feedback is all absolutely fine. So very, very interested to know what the different stakeholders think, because these standards, we are trying to do quite a lot with them. They're global. They're going to hopefully appeal to lots and lots of different sorts of firms. So, it is good that we keep them fairly high level, but they also have to be meaningful, and they have to be sensible, and they have to make sense for lots of different firms. So please do let us know what you think. And thank you very much for listening. You have the contact details for the feedback. So we look forward to receiving it and then letting people know when we've incorporated it and hopefully finalising the standards so we can get them out there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.